Charles Kuralt's life began far away from fame and television studios. He was born on September 10, 1934, in Wilmington, North Carolina, but his family soon moved to a small tobacco farm in Onslow County. The farm had no electricity, no indoor plumbing, and no fancy comforts, just hard work and wide open land. Yet even in those simple surroundings, young Charles showed a curious and creative mind. He built kites from newspaper and flour paste, carved slingshots from dogwood branches, and found joy in small things like watching Venus flytraps snap shut. His childhood wasn't about money or luxury. It was about imagination and observation, the same qualities that later made him one of America's most beloved storytellers. When his family moved around the South from Washington, North Carolina, to Atlanta, and finally to Charlotte, Charles carried that same curiosity with him. His father worked in social services, helping poor families, and young Charles saw early on the struggles of others. These early experiences gave him empathy, a trait that would become his biggest strength as a journalist. At just 14, he started working in radio, announcing baseball games and hosting music shows. He even won a national speech contest and met President Harry S. Truman. By the time most teenagers were still figuring out their future, Charles already knew he wanted to tell stories. And not just any stories, stories about ordinary people living honest lives. When Charles entered the University of North Carolina in 1951, he was already a rising star in broadcasting. He studied history but spent most of his time working for radio stations, covering sports and local news. His teachers quickly saw he was something special. He could write clearly, speak calmly, and capture emotion in every sentence. He wasn't loud or flashy, but people listened when he spoke because it felt real. He once said he wanted people to feel like he was sitting beside them in their living room. At the university's student newspaper, the Daily Tar Heel, Charles became known for his fearless editing. He criticized segregation in the South, defended free speech, and wasn't afraid to challenge authority. Some people called him a troublemaker, others called him brave. But even then, Charles was learning what kind of reporter he wanted to be, one who told the truth, even when it made others uncomfortable. After graduating in 1955, he joined CBS News at just 23 years old. He was one of the youngest correspondents in the network's history. In an era when television news was still new, Charles brought warmth and authenticity. He wasn't just reading headlines, he was connecting with people through his words and his calm, trustworthy voice. At first, Kuralt covered serious world events. CBS sent him to dangerous places like Latin America, where revolutions and riots were breaking out. He reported from Brazil, Cuba, and Vietnam. He even witnessed gunfire and nearly lost his life during the Vietnam War. He covered the civil rights marches in Selma, Alabama, capturing powerful stories of courage and struggle. But after years of war zones and breaking news, Charles began to feel something missing. He once said he was tired of chasing disasters. He wanted to tell stories about life, not just death and conflict. In 1967, he proposed a new idea to CBS. He asked for a small motorhome, a cameraman, and no assigned stories. His plan was simple: travel across America and find interesting people on the backroads, not celebrities or politicians, but everyday folks with remarkable lives. The network didn't expect much from it, but what came next changed TV history. That project became On the Road, one of the most beloved features ever created. Charles and his cameraman traveled more than 1 million miles over the next 2 decades, visiting farmers, teachers, craftsmen, and dreamers. His soft-spoken storytelling style touched millions. He reminded America that beauty and kindness could still be found in the smallest corners of life. On the Road wasn't just a show, it was a celebration of humanity. Charles Kuralt found stories no one else was looking for. He visited a 99-year-old bricklayer who still worked every day, a woman who owned the world's largest ball of string, and a small-town teacher who had been teaching for 50 years in the same one-room schoolhouse. These weren't famous people. They were ordinary Americans who represented something real and enduring. Charles gave them a voice when most media focused on celebrities and conflict. Viewers loved it. His warm, gentle voice and slow storytelling pace made people feel comforted. In a world filled with political tension and war, On the Road offered peace. Time magazine once called his short stories 2-minute ceasefires. He won several Peabody Awards and became one of the most trusted names in journalism. But even as he traveled across the country, sharing stories of honesty and simplicity, Charles himself was living a complicated personal life that few people knew about. While he told the world about the beauty of truth and connection, his own truth was something he kept hidden, even from those closest to him. In public, Charles Kuralt seemed to have the perfect life. He was successful, respected, and loved by viewers across America. He had married Suzanne Petty Bird, a lawyer, in 1962, and they lived comfortably in New York. To everyone around them, they appeared to be a happy, stable couple. But behind the camera and away from the spotlight, Charles was living another life, one that would stay secret for nearly 30 years. In 1968, while working on the Road in Reno, Nevada, he met a woman named Patricia Shannon. She was divorced, with 3 children, and deeply involved in community work. Charles was charming and kind, and the two quickly formed a connection. What started as friendship soon turned into something deeper. He began sending her letters, visiting often, and supporting her financially. Within a year, he helped her move and even paid for her children's education. While his wife in New York believed he was always traveling for work, he was actually dividing his time between two families, one public, one private. He sent Patricia flowers, wrote her poems, and even signed letters to her children, as pop. It was a secret no one suspected, hidden behind his friendly television smile. CharlesKuralt's double life wasn't a brief affair. It was a secret partnership that lasted nearly 3 decades. In 1970, he bought land in Montana, near the Big Hole River, telling his wife it was just a quiet fishing retreat. In reality, it was where he spent his private time with Patricia Shannon. Together, they built a small cabin and later added more land, eventually owning around 90 acres. They spent holidays there, shared letters and phone calls almost daily, and dreamed about growing old together. He even helped Patricia's son find work and treated her children like his own. Over the years, Charles gave Patricia large sums of money, more than $600,000, to build her home, pay tuition, and even buy a cottage in Ireland. In today's money, that would be worth several $1,000,000. All of it was done quietly, without his wife knowing. While he was being celebrated on TV for his honesty and warmth, his private life was built on careful lies. He managed to keep the two worlds completely separate, one filled with cameras and fame, the other with secret letters and hidden phone calls. It was a balancing act that lasted his entire adult life. In June 1997, CharlesKuralt's health began to fail. He was suffering from lupus, an autoimmune disease that left him weak and bedridden. As he lay in a New York hospital, just weeks before his death, he wrote a final letter to Patricia Shannon. In it, he promised to make sure she inherited the Montana property, the land that had become their secret home. He wrote, "I'll have the lawyer visit the hospital to be sure you inherit the rest of the place in Montana, if it comes to that." It was his last attempt to protect the life he had built with her. On July 4, 1997, CharlesKuralt died at the age of 62. America mourned the loss of a man who had spent his life celebrating ordinary people. Tributes poured in from across the country, but just days after his funeral, the truth he had hidden for decades came to light. Patricia Shannon arrived with his handwritten letter, shocking everyone, especially his wife, Petty, who had no idea her husband had been living a double life. What followed was not just heartbreak, but a long and bitter legal battle over the Montana property and the money Charles had secretly given away. When the letter became public, it changed everything. Kuralt's wife of 35 years was devastated to learn that her husband had been supporting another woman and her children for nearly 3 decades. His daughters from his first marriage were also stunned. The man they had admired and loved had led a second life filled with lies. In court, Patricia Shannon presented the letter and shared stories of their long relationship. She even read a poem Charles had written for her, ending with the words, "My life." She explained how he had paid for her children's schooling, bought land, and visited often. Her testimony painted a picture of a man who had 2 families, one public and one private, each believing they were his true home. In 2000, the Montana Supreme Court ruled in Patricia Shannon's favor, granting her ownership of the property based on Charles's final letter. The court recognized his intent, even though it was never formalized through a lawyer. The decision cost the estate nearly $1 million in taxes and property value. After CharlesKuralt's death, what began as a simple inheritance question turned into one of the most talked about legal battles in Montana's history. Patricia Shannon came forward with that short but powerful letter Charles had written just weeks before he passed away. It wasn't typed or witnessed, just handwritten, brief and emotional. But for Patricia, it was proof of his last wish, to leave her the land in Montana that had symbolized their secret love for nearly 30 years. Kuralt's wife, Petty, and his daughters were devastated when they learned of Patricia's existence. They couldn't believe that the man who had been their loving husband and father had carried on a hidden relationship for so long. At first, Petty refused to accept the letter as legitimate. She argued that it wasn't a valid legal document and that Charles had made no official change to his will. For her, this was not only about property, it was about the truth of her marriage and the betrayal that came with it. The courtroom became a place where 2 parts of Kuralt's life collided, and both women fought to prove their connection to him. The story spread quickly across the country. Newspapers, talk shows, and magazines covered it in detail, trying to make sense of how such a beloved journalist could have kept such a major secret. Many people were torn. Some defended Patricia, saying Charles truly loved her and wanted her cared for. Others supported Petty, arguing that decades of deception couldn't be excused. When the court ruled in Patricia's favor, it felt like a final twist in a story that had already shocked everyone who thought they knew the real CharlesKuralt. 2. How the scandal changed his image before his death. CharlesKuralt had one of the cleanest reputations in journalism. He was the gentle storyteller who made Americans smile. But once the secret came out, people started to question everything. Could someone who spoke so beautifully about honesty and everyday goodness really have lived such a complicated lie? For a while, his name was associated less with On the Road and more with betrayal. Critics called him hypocritical, saying he had built a career on sincerity while deceiving his loved ones. Yet others took a more forgiving view. They argued that Kuralt was human, not a saint, but a man with emotions and weaknesses like anyone else. They said he wasn't trying to hurt his wife or his family. He was trying to find happiness in two different worlds that he couldn't bring together. He loved his wife, but he also loved Patricia. And instead of choosing one life, he tried to live both. That was his biggest mistake, not his love, but his silence. For many fans, this duality made him more complex. Not just a smiling face on television, but a real person who struggled with guilt and desire. Over time, people began to separate his professional legacy from his personal failings. His storytelling still mattered, his voice still comforted, and his impact on journalism didn't disappear. But the scandal did leave a permanent shadow, a reminder that even the kindest faces on screen can hide untold stories. Despite the controversy, CharlesKuralt's influence on journalism remains powerful. Long before social media or the internet, he showed that stories didn't need to be fast or sensational to touch people's hearts. He believed that news should remind people of what connects them, not just what divides them. His program On the Road changed how networks viewed soft news. Before Kuralt, networks thought people only cared about politics, crime, and world events. After Kuralt, they realized audiences also cared about kindness, humor, and human spirit. His work inspired future shows like CBS Sunday Morning, Dateline's American Story, and even parts of Humans of New York. Reporters learned that you could find meaning in a small-town diner, on a country road, or in a farmer's handshake. Kuralt's writing style, simple, poetic, and heartfelt, became a model for broadcast storytelling. He used short sentences, pauses, and a gentle rhythm that made every story sound like a conversation. Even after his personal flaws came to light, journalism schools continued to study his work. His ability to make people feel something through ordinary stories became a timeless lesson. Kuralt once said, "The everyday kindness of the backroads more than makes up for the acts of greed in the headlines." Those words still hold meaning today, especially in a media world often filled with negativity and noise. His legacy reminds journalists that the most powerful stories are often the quiet ones. After the court's decision, Patricia Shannon chose to live quietly. She moved permanently to Montana, where she continued to care for the land she and Charles had shared for decades. The property near the Big Hole River became her sanctuary, a place filled with memories of a man she had loved deeply, even if she could never fully have him. In interviews, Patricia often spoke about Charles with affection and sadness. She never described him as cruel or dishonest. Instead, she saw him as a man trapped between duty and love. He wanted to make everyone happy, she once said, and in the end, that was impossible. She published her memoir, Charles and Me, not to expose him, but to share the truth as she experienced it, a story of love, secrecy, and emotional complexity. Many readers sympathized with her, seeing her as the woman who gave up her own public life to protect a man's reputation. Others criticized her for revealing the secret after his death. But no matter how people viewed her, Patricia's role in CharlesKuralt's story became permanent. She represented the side of his life that was real but hidden, a side that revealed the deep contradictions of human love. CharlesKuralt's story isn't just a scandal, it's a reflection of something deeply human. It shows how complicated people can be and how love doesn't always fit into neat boxes. Many who studied his life saw it as a moral lesson about honesty and the price of silence. Kuralt had built his life on kindness and empathy, yet he couldn't be honest with the two women who mattered most to him. He wasn't cruel, but he was afraid of hurting one person while trying to protect another. That fear kept him trapped in his own web of secrecy. In the end, his story forces us to ask difficult questions. Can someone do great good in the world and still live with personal deception? Can love justify lies? The answer isn't simple. Kuralt's life proves that even the best of us can be flawed. He didn't destroy lives with hatred or greed. He complicated them through love and indecision. His story remains both tragic and deeply relatable because it mirrors the conflicts many people quietly face, the struggle between responsibility and happiness, truth and comfort. If there's one lesson from his double life, it's this: truth always finds its way out. No matter how carefully a person hides their secrets, time eventually reveals them. And when it does, it leaves behind both pain and understanding. Today, more than 2 decades after his death, CharlesKuralt's memory still lives on, not only in old On the Road clips, but in the countless storytellers he inspired. Many Americans still remember the sound of his voice, the gentle tone that made them feel at peace. They remember him driving his RV down quiet roads, stopping in small towns, talking to people who rarely made the news. His stories gave dignity to those who had none and reminded the country that beauty could be found anywhere in a cornfield, a diner, or a child's laughter. For younger generations, Kuralt's work has found new life online. His segments are shared on YouTube, often under titles like The Kindest Man on Television or America's Storyteller. Viewers still comment on how his simple approach to storytelling feels refreshing in a fast-paced digital world.